because they're looking for consistency. Biblical Hebrew is anything but, the Bible itself is anything but consistent. So, in other words, in this aspect, but Rashi does not address it. Sometimes the Talmud addresses it, and sometimes the Medrash addresses it and extracts meaning from the extra vav or the lack thereof. And Rashi typically does not address it. There's only a few places in the Torah where Rashi addresses it. This is one place. Rashi says, "Yehi me'orot, let there be luminaries." Says Rashi, if you spell, because of the way this word is spelled, it's spelled me'orot without a vav. And therefore, says Rashi, me'erot ktiv. It's written as if it says, let there be a me'era. Me'era is curse. Let there be curses in the heavens. That's what the word says according to the spelling without the vav. So again, this is not pshat. This is not the simple meaning, because like I said, Rashi typically does not even address this concept as a question of why something has a vav or doesn't have a vav. Typically, Rashi does not even address it. But this is one of the exceptions. So what does it mean? Says Rashi, this tells you that Wednesday is a day of curse. And Rashi quotes a Talmud that says on Wednesdays it was a bad omen because children would get sick with a illness called askara. Askara was some illness we think that made it hard for children to breathe. Maybe like corona, I don't know, but same idea. It made it hard to breathe. But in any case, Wednesday was the day they would pray that children should not be inflicted with askara. Okay, wonderful. What does this really mean? So there's a beautiful commentator, Kli Yakar, and the Kli Yakar says as follows. What's really happening here? What's really happening here is a much broader concept of the curse, the sadness of Wednesday. What's the sadness of Wednesday? So what's the problem with Wednesday is that Wednesday represents time, and anything subject to time is sad. Yes, Tina, the way the word is spelled also affects the gematria, so there's meaning in that sense as well. Absolutely. Okay, so Wednesday is sad. Why is Wednesday sad? Because anything under time is sad. And here, don't try this at home. But if you ever want to make yourself sad, here's the way to do it. Okay, you ready? Here it goes. The problem with sadness, the problem with anything under the time, is that no matter what you have and how happy you are, there's one guarantee. The guarantee is it's going to end, right? Because passage of time means nothing ever stays the same. So it's good because you grow, right? And the children, when they're very young, when they're 1 year old, they love their birthday because time passes and you grow. But ultimately, that blessing of growth has the other side to it. And the other side to it is any moment that you're enjoying, any moment that is meaningful to you, is fleeting. Why is it fleeting? Because it's under the sun. It's under time. It's subject to time. And I could elaborate upon this if I would want to make you sad, but thankfully for you, I don't want to make you sad this morning. Any good thing will end. Any good thing will end. That's just the nature of it. And that's very sad. So says the Kli Yakar, what the verse is really telling you, let there be. Let there be. Oh, yes, of course, Kohelet under the sun. Mark, give me just 1 second, I'm heading there. Mark points out that the book of Kohelet, King Solomon says, everything under the sun is Hevel Havalim, is they translate it as vanity, but vanity is the wrong word. Hevel Havalim means it's nothing, it's insignificant. It's insignificant, right? What do you have? Whatever you amassed in this life, whatever it is, it's wealth, it's wisdom, it's family, it's whatever you got, it doesn't really matter because it's not going to last. Why? It says, my mom means it's under the sun. It's under the sun means it's subject to time. Says the Kli Yakar, when the verse says, let there be, when the Medrash points out that the verse says, let there be luminaries, and the luminary, it means that it's missing the vav, meaning it's spelled let there be curse. It's because anything under the sun, I hate to break it to you, is cursed. Why is it cursed? It doesn't last. So you could be sitting on your yacht, enjoying the sunset with a beer. It's wonderful. Yeah, but it's not going to last. Tomorrow you'll be back in the office. Okay? And this happens to anything. It doesn't matter. And I was very young. I read this okay, I don't want to make you sad. Fine. What's the solution to the problem? But not here, Wednesday morning, to make you sad. Sunday morning. I'm getting confused. I think, if you study Torah, you're reading about Wednesday, you think it's Wednesday. It's really Sunday. Okay, Sunday morning. We're not here to make you sad. The Kli Yakar is not here to make you sad and tell you that everything you have, ladies and gentlemen, is going to end, so therefore you may as well be sad now, right? One attitude is, the verse says, people say the attitude of the wicked is, let's eat or drink because tomorrow we'll die. Because tomorrow we'll die. But that's not our attitude. In other words, don't think about it. Don't think about it because we're going to die anyway. That's one way. That's called being oblivious. But that's just an escape. So what's the real attitude? So it looks like Steve says, does not Wednesday be the day that prepares us for the forward of Shabbos, which would seem positive as opposed to sad? Yeah. Very good. All the ingredients are here. Wednesday's a mess. We're already turning toward Shabbos, but on the other hand, it's sad. It's under the sun. What's really happening here? So what's happening here is we have to go back to the verse that Mark introduced. Kohelet says, King Solomon says, everything under the sun is Hevel Havalim is insignificant. Double insignificant. Hevel literally means in Hebrew, Hevel is, it's an interesting word. It means also like breath. Breath is nothing. It's intangible. It's fleeting. It's fleeting, like a word. It's fleeting. Says the Gemara. I think it's actually a Zohar. I should know this, but I don't. I think it's. I can't remember. I think it's a Zohar, but maybe a Medrash. I'm not sure. Says the Medrash. I guess Zohar is also a Medrash. I could say Medrash and be technically correct. Says the Medrash that everything under the sun is insignificant. So what does that mean? So it means if I pray to God, it's insignificant. Does it mean if I do a mitzvah, it's insignificant? Does it mean if I study Torah, it's insignificant because it's fleeting? Says the Medrash, anything under the sun is fleeting. What is not fleeting? Something that's above the sun. What's above the sun? The Torah is above the sun. Meaning anything physical is under the sun, meaning it's subject to time. It's physical. It's subject to the time and place, to the constraints of time and place. That is indeed sad because that's going to end, right? No matter what you have, it's amazing. Whatever the case is, whatever you have, I'm not going to spell out your whole life, but whatever you have, it's very exciting. But it's going to end. But what's going to end? It's going to end if it's under the sun. If it's above the sun, you study Torah, you're transcending physical barriers of time and space because you're touching spirituality, you're touching God. God transcends time and space. That's the whole idea of God's name is Hashem. Yud Kei Vav Kei is Haya Hoveh V'Yeh. It's one word comprising the three words of past, present, and future. He was, he is, and will be, all into one name, telling us that the definition of God, definition of true spirituality, transcendence, is even transcendence of time, because time was created, but there's something precedes the creation of time, which is creator. So in other words, the only way to break free of the sadness of the universe is to connect to something that is above time, which is the Torah, or meaning connection to God. Now this fits with what Steve is saying. Steve is saying, 1 second, Wednesday is also the day to prepare to Shabbat. Yes, of course, the antidote to the sadness, to the potential curse of being under the sun is you have to connect yourself to something that's above the sun and that transcends time. And that's the true joy. And if you want a metaphor, I once came up with this metaphor. It's not that profound, but it's a nice metaphor. The metaphor is like this. So you want to enjoy the summer evening. So you go and you buy yourself an ice cream. But you take your child or your spouse or your friend, whoever you want to connect to, and you go out for ice cream. And hopefully it's a good ice cream. Now, if you examine this experience and you have a great time, if you examine this experience, the ice cream itself is fleeting, is cursed. Cursed in the sense that it's fleeting, it's not going to last. It's actually depressing. You know, some people, when they have a fun time and they go back to the mundane, they're actually sadder than they were, right? So if you go on vacation, you have a wonderful time, and then you realize that the vacation is over, you're so sad that the vacation is over, so on the flight back, you're actually sadder than you were before you left. So I'm not sure it was so helpful. So the point of the matter is, and if you look at the ice cream itself is a cursed situation. Why? Because cursed in the sense that it's fleeting. It's not going. It's sad. It has a deep sadness within it because the greater the pleasure is, but the more depressing it is that it's going to end. Okay. What's the solution? The solution is that the ice cream is not ice cream. The ice cream is an opportunity for me to connect to you. Oh, that's a spiritual connection. Spiritual connection doesn't end when I finish the ice cream cone. The spiritual connection transcends that experience of the physical connection. So if you live a life that's not just focused on the physical, but you're actually looking at the spiritual experience that lies within the experience of the ice cream, then then it didn't really end. Then it's not really sad. Because yes, I agree that external, physical packaging of this experience is fleeting, but the bond that was created, that bond it doesn't end. That bond continues even after we finish the cone. So I spent $1, got myself an ice cream. So you could say I got something fleeting, transient, or you could say, no, I got something that's everlasting, because the bond created by this ice cream potentially actually could live on and transcend the experience. So what really we're saying here, what the Torah is alluding to, what the Medrash, again, it's not the simple meaning, but it's the deep mysticism hidden within the Medrash. Again, all extracted from the fact that the word luminaries are missing one letter, so you get to potential curse. Time is potentially cursed. Cursed in the sense it's potentially sad. Why is it sad? Because it's fleeting. It's going to end. That's all we know for sure, is it's going to end. Right? What did Benjamin Franklin, I think, say? Nothing is certain except death and taxes. And of the two, it's taxes that is even more certain. But in any case, that's the problem. What's the solution? The solution is, don't get caught up with the sun. Don't get caught up with the luminaries. You have to shoot for, they say shoot for the stars. No, you have to shoot for beyond the luminaries. You have to go above the sun. You have to go above the concept of physical time and space. You have to find something in your life that transcends the physical, and the physical actually becomes a tool for the spiritual, and the spiritual is everlasting. That is the Kli Yakar explaining the Medrash, explaining why there's a missing Vav in Yehi Ma'orot, that to be luminaries on day 4. So that is, for that, I feel terrible and horrible that I hit mute all, so I'm going to hit unmute all. Meanwhile, I'm going to say a little L'chaim, and if anybody wants to say anything good, and if not, we're going to move to be even happier. Because actually, no, it's Wednesday sad all around. It's not going to be an easy day. But you see, the coffee is not really coffee. See, let's think about the coffee for a second. You make a coffee, it's very sad because the coffee is very enjoyable. The problem is, before you know it, what is this? It's 16 ounces. 16 ounces later, I'm lacking. It's not here. It doesn't last anymore. I always look for the largest coffee cup in the house because I understand that things are subject to change and it's not going to last, and I need it to last as much as possible. But ultimately, you can't escape the fact that if it's physical, it's going to end. But what happens if I drink the coffee and the coffee is not really coffee? Coffee puts you in the mood to study Torah or to connect to other people, or even better, both, connecting to other people and studying Torah. Okay, that's a double hitter. So then the coffee is not sad anymore, because the coffee is not transcendent. The coffee is not fleeting. The coffee creates a connection that is above the sun. It's everlasting, and that's the true joy. So L'chaim, don't get distracted. This is not fleeting. This is not physical. This is not below the sun. We're studying Torah. It's above the sun, and therefore it's going to bring true and everlasting and meaning and joy. L'chaim, cheers. Okay.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
One question. So let's say you enjoy taking walks with your children. Let's say it's Saturday, it's beautiful outside. So taking a walk is two people in physical space connecting because they're talking and they're enjoying being together. So you'd think that that's transcendent. But yet, you're two people who can only do it because you're in that time and space together. And so is it really transcendent? Like, how is anything, because you're in your body and you can only be with a person if you're both in your physical bodies? I understand that, like, yes, one day you can connect to the memory of having shared that time, but isn't it still a physical thing that you're doing?
Let's talk about space before we talk about time, because it's easier to understand it with space, and then we'll talk about time. So space means we're in the same house. So we feel, and we actually had breakfast together, so we're both very happy, right? Then I send my child off to school. So now my child is in a different space than I am. So is it true to say that the bond that was created when we were sitting in the kitchen together is no longer true because my child is in the classroom? No, everybody understands that you still feel connected to your child. You still feel connected, even though you're not in the same space. So of course, because we're physical people, we feel the connection stronger when we're together, but not necessarily. Sometimes, in fact, the distance creates the bond, but that's another story. The longing, that's another story. But let's assume when we're together, it's easier for us to feel connected. But we understand that it's not limited to, we don't have to literally be glued to each other to feel connected. You can go to school, you could send your child off to school and you still feel connected, even though there's a space barrier of however many miles between you and your child. Why? Because the connection is not just physical, it's also spiritual, and spiritual transcends space. Now, the same thing is with time. In other words, if we had an experience in our youth that connects us, that bond will last decades. Not only the memory, the actual connection, right? Let's bring an example from the negative. It's sometimes easier to see the negative. Thank God we have a psychologist on the phone, on the call, on the Zoom. So they'll tell you that a lot of what happens with people in the negative sense is that a trauma that happens when the child is very young literally lives on and literally lasts for decades, right? How could it last for decades? It was only an experience. Someone told me something, right? Somebody told me something, and literally it lasts for decades in the negative sense. What lasts for decades? Not the physical abuse. The physical aspect of abuse doesn't last for decades, but the spiritual, the negative, in other words, the spiritual aspect of that abuse, negative spiritual, the spiritual aspect of that abuse does indeed last for decades. And you can the Talmud says, Meruba midatayva, in the negative sense, it's even more true in the positive sense. Right? If it's true in the negative sense, it's even more true in the positive sense. And therefore, if a negative experience could last for decades, a positive experience can last for decades. Someone told you something when you were a young child. They said, oh, you're a good architect. And you go and you become an architect. And that inspiration lasted for decades. Then, yeah, the actual event didn't last for decades. That's the physical garment or the physical body of the experience didn't last for decades. But the soul of that event lasted for decades. And truth is, it lasts forever. We just don't see it. But the truth of the matter is, you do a mitzvah, says the Kabbalah, the Rebbe talks about it in Tanya. You say, when you do a spiritual action, that unity that happens between the person and God, in the spiritual realm, it's everlasting. You cannot change. Because the moment you touch spirituality, the moment you transcend the sun, if you're going to transcend the sun, you're going to be everlasting. So the spirit, every experience has both a physical body and a spiritual soul of that experience. So people who only live their life focusing on the physical, then everything is fleeting and everything there's a deep sadness embedded in the reality of creation. That's because everything ends. Everything ends. You're under the sun, it's going to end. So no matter how exciting your existence is at this moment, I guarantee you it's going to end. It's not going to end in a minute. It'll end in a day, not in a day, in a year, not in a year, a decade, if not now, 100 years. Everything is going to end. So some people just block that knowledge out, right? Eat, drink, eat and be merry because tomorrow we'll die, but don't think about it. That's one response. It's called denial or being oblivious. Another response is to connect to something that's above the sun and make my transient existence transcendent and meaningful. And the only way to do so is to connect to something that's above the sun. And it doesn't only mean studying Torah, of course, primarily that, but I'm just saying, even in my existence, the way I see the world, I don't look so much at the outside, at the physical container, I look at the inner experience. So when I'm eating ice cream with someone I love, if I think about the ice cream is going to end. But if I think about the bond that's created through the ice cream, oh, that's above the sun, that will transcend, that can last decades, and that can last forever, in fact.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
Going back to, and I have lots of comments about what you said in terms of psychology, but I'll leave it for now. But so what is the thinking about when we'll be able to see life on other planets would be revealed? Would it mean that life here would have to end?
There's nothing in the Torah that tells you that excludes the possibility of life on other planets. So if tomorrow morning you find dinosaurs on Mars or on any other planet, that doesn't do anything. That doesn't do anything to our theology. What would potentially be I don't want to say a challenge, something to think about. This would be a challenge. Would be, and therefore, I think we would say that this doesn't exist. But it would be a problem to say that if there is another planet or other life forms and other planets that have moral choice. That may be a little bit of a problem, because then, so did they get their own Torah? Did they supposed to listen to our Torah? So if that ever happens, we get together and make a Zoom call with the people of the other planets. I'll have to compare notes of how we understand morality. But if you can have but that would be the question of morality. But in life, or water, or even life, even advanced life, that's not something we're too worried about. In other words, there's nothing in the Torah that would preclude belief in the possible in life in any other planet.
Rabbi, quick question.
Yes.
So if today becomes yesterday, and when you're telling us joke or eating a cheesecake, you think back to another occasion when you heard the joke or you ate that cheesecake. So you're reconnecting. In a manner of speaking, where does time go?
That's a good question. And there's very smart people that spend a lot of time thinking about what is the meaning of time. And I have enough intelligence to tell you that I'm not sure I can answer that question, certainly not on one foot. But I don't know this is a philosophical discussion that I don't know that I have the tools to fully address. But it's clear, however you define it philosophically, we all feel that in the physical sense, time is fleeting. What happened yesterday is gone. Now, what we're trying to offer here is the experience that happened yesterday. The physical experience is gone, but the spiritual experience transcends. So if we had cheesecake yesterday, it's not just thinking back. It's not like I'm sitting here yesterday and I could remember the cheesecake of yesterday. It's much deeper than that. The impact that the cheesecake had on me, potentially, I feel close to you. Now, 2 decades later, I bump into you on Greenwich Avenue or in Miami, wherever else, and I run into you, and all of a sudden, I feel connected to you. Why do I feel connected to you? I haven't seen you in 2 decades. Because 2 decades ago, we had cheesecake. The cheesecake has been dead for 20 years. Yeah, the cheesecake has been dead for 20 years, but not the spiritual experience of the cheesecake. That's alive. That's everlasting. That's true. Just like a trauma could last for forever, a positive spiritual experience could last forever. So it's not just I'm remembering back to an event that happened in the past. That's true too. That's also true. But it's much more than that. It's that the past still exists in the spiritual sense. If you can connect to what the Medrash says, if you can go above the sun. Sun means, under the sun means everything, all physical things that are subject to time and space. If you can go above the sun, that's a spiritual experience. Spiritual experiences are not subject to the changes of time and space.
Thank you.
Okay, so I just gave you the formula to always have joy, because like I said, there's a backdrop of the universe that's very sad. And some people who are sad like to be sad. I'm a little bit of like that. I can appreciate a good sad day. I can appreciate a little sadness once in a while. So the people who are good at being sad are able to touch, are people who feel a little bit of that backdrop of sadness that's embedded into creation, that listen, this is crazy, this is all ending, this is meaningless, right? It's an existential crisis, it's meaningless. So, and that's a real thing. It's a real thing. It exists. And again, it's the backdrop of all of reality. Starting on the 4th day, as soon as you understand that there's orbits and there's luminaries and everything is passing and nothing stands still, then you realize everything is going to end. And the only solution to break free of that curse, again, curse of sadness, is you better connect to something that's above the sun. And everybody at some point is going to have a midlife crisis. Some people have it when they're in their teens. Some people have it when they're midlife. Some people have it in the 90s. But everybody has a midlife crisis. And the midlife crisis is really when you feel and you realize that you've achieved some degree of success. But then you ask yourself, what does it all mean? And the answer to the midlife crisis is, of course, to go out and buy a red convertible. No, I'm kidding. The answer to the midlife crisis is to connect to something meaningful. In other words, spiritual. Because when you do, now you realize that even though everything I have is fleeting, but the spiritual experience that I'm creating, that is immortal. And people need immortality. And people sense that if they once people face mortality, they get very sad and very depressed. But the only way to break that is not to ignore it, but to say, yes, part of me is mortal, but part of me could become immortal. That's the part if I connect to something spiritual, and spiritual is above time, and spirituality is immortal. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the conclusion of the first part of the sadness of this morning. The good news is we have a little bit more sadness. No, I'm kidding. Listen, you're giving me, what can I do with this class? You're giving me the start, you're giving me the raw materials. The raw materials is giving me this world. This world is a sad place. You want me to make it a happy place? I'm struggling, but I'm dealing with reality. Reality is not always as pretty as we want it to be. So I'm sort of, I have a disadvantage starting out to try to make you happy, but we're getting there. You see, we started with beneath the sun is sad, but above the sun is happy. So we're getting there. And now we're going to continue down our journey of day 4. And day 4, everything starts with the phrase of the verse, and we have a big overarching problem, and everybody tries to solve this problem. And the problem is that the answers they give is even more mysterious than the original question. And then it's left to us to figure out everyone's muted. Unmute all. Someone's asking a question. I don't know who, but now everyone could speak if anybody wants to speak. So please jump in. Don't be afraid. Oh, Philip, if everyone involved in a past experience forgets it, does it no longer exist? Well, we have not one psychologist here. I think we have 2. And they will tell you that there's something called the subconscious. And it doesn't matter if I even remember the experience. I'm talking physical. I'm not talking mystical or spiritual. This is very physical. I had an experience. I don't remember it. And yet, it's very much alive in my life. In fact, it's so alive, it's probably the most dominant thing in my psyche is the event that I don't remember, but my subconscious remembers it. So this is an example that even someone completely rational understands that there are certain things that are not tangible, but they're everlasting. Again, of course, everlasting in the context of life. Once I'm dead, I'm dead. But you see what I'm saying? I'm saying it's not dependent on memory. Now, if you're not just completely rational and you're a little bit mystical, then you or philosophical, forget about mystical, philosophical, then you understand that the same is true in the spiritual sense. So just because I no longer remember it, just because even I may not even be on this planet, but the spiritual experience is immortal. What does that look like? Unfortunately, I can't tell you. If I could put up a slide here, share my screen and put up a slide and show you what the afterlife looks like, I would do so. I don't just mean afterlife. I mean, we are by definition, we're physical beings. So it's very hard for us to picture an experience that is divorced of the physical. And therefore, all the examples I'm bringing you are examples that are, in some sense, more spiritual, but they're still connected to the physical reality. But the truth of the matter is, if you're philosophically inclined, certainly spiritually inclined, you understand and you sense that the same would be true. Just like if I forget about an experience, it's still very much alive. Like I said, it can be the most dominant factor of my personality. Just because I don't remember it, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The same thing is in the spiritual sense. I did a mitzvah, I did a good deed, I helped a lady across the street. That energy is immortal. And that's what the Medrash is saying about the Torah. When you study Torah, you're taking SpaceX, a space shuttle, to higher than the heavens. Meaning to say, everything else you'll do in your day, anything physical, is beneath the heavens. The moment you connect to something spiritual, beneath the sun. The moment you connect to something spiritual, you're above the sun. What does it mean to be above the sun? To be above the sun means it's spiritual. It's not subject to the changes of time. So I hope that's somewhat interesting. To me, it's fascinating stuff because I love the sadness. Not too much.
Rabbi,
Yeah,
I have a question about
go
this.
ahead.
So maybe the fact that that the event ends isn't really important. It's created. So like Amy said, she takes a walk with her child, and that's a limited amount of time, but it allows the two of them to focus on the spiritual experience they have. So time doesn't matter, and there's really no reason to be sad. It's actually, you should be happy that you focused on that event. It's the opposite, I think, where you should be happy you have the time with your child or whoever you do, or whatever you do in that moment. And then that's why time was created. So we would then have the experience, and then it would turn into a remembrance or a spiritual thing. But without time and the goodness of time, we wouldn't be able to fathom the experience. You need to concentrate on that particular moment. And that's what time allows you to do. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. You said it better than me. I really should give you the mic.
No,
In other words-
I asked you a question, and I just want you to.
No, the answer is of course. Of course, the answer is that we have to seek the spiritual, and then we're joyous and we're not sad. Of course, that's the answer.
No, but it doesn't matter about time. You don't need to be sad about
Because
time.
you're spiritual. Seth, you're spiritual. Somebody who is physically oriented, and when they go out to dinner with somebody else, they're not really going to connect to somebody else. They're just going for the steak, right? Two people, I always like to paint this picture. Two couples are going out for dinner. They're sitting in the same restaurant, table next to table. Of course, with social distancing, it's on Greenwich Avenue, now there's space. Table next to table. They order the same menu, okay? So one couple, when they're eating, they're not here to connect to each other. They're here to eat the meat. Another couple is here to connect. They're not here to the meat. You have to connect. You have to connect, you have to eat. It's a bad joke. It's a terrible joke, but I can't, it's too early for me to be disciplined. The joke is that there was an Israeli politician, I'm not going to say his name, who was a little bit heavy set. And he would walk into the restaurant and they would say, Mr. Okay, I'll say his name. Mr. Sharon, what do you want for dinner? What do you want? What do you want to order? So he would say, I need food for an hour. Meaning to say, he's got to sit and have a meeting for an hour. Okay, we need food for an hour, right? So one person is here, they're here for the steak. The other person is not here. I'm here to connect to you. Okay, we need steak so we can have what to talk about when we're connecting. So these are two experiences. They look very similar. One couple is what Seth is describing. They're not here. It's not the physical experience. They're not going to be sad when they go home. The other couple who didn't really come to speak to each other, they really came for the steak. On the way home, first of all, they're going to have a stomachache because they ate too much steak. But they're going to be sad because that experience is ended. So yes, do what Seth says. Always connect to the spirituality of the moment and stay away. In other words, don't be trapped by the so to quote unquote. Oh, if you're trapped in the physical, it's going to be some degree of sadness. But yeah, my job here is not to tell you to stay in the sadness. Take the physical moment and use that moment to transcend. So next time you go to dinner and you have steak, understand that the steak is not good or bad. It depends. If you're here for the steak, it's going to end. If you're here for the experience, then it's everlasting. Okay, so we discussed the coffee, we discussed the steak, we discussed the ice cream, we covered all our bases. Now we're safe. Now we can continue.
Rabbi,
Yes.
if the spiritual is not subject to time, and you have a good experience, that's, I call it good, could be positive, but you have a bad experience, so now you're carrying that bad experience with you forever.
Oh, Ken, you're asking me the hard questions today. I thought you were going to give me a break on Sunday morning. You're going to let me just sail through the morning, but you're giving me the hard questions. The answer is, so it's addressed. I don't know if I can explain it fully, but it's addressed. The good news, it's addressed. And the answer is that negativity by definition, will not last forever because negativity is false. So ultimately, the only thing that truly lasts forever would be the positive. So therefore, the example that I gave before is not perfect. The example I gave before is a person experiences a trauma, negative trauma, and that event happened once when I was 10 years old or 5 years old. And we say that that negative trauma lasts forever. So it's true, it could last forever, but ultimately it's not forever, because ultimately either I can be healed or I can, if I die, the experience doesn't last forever. So ultimately the holy has an advantage over the unholy. In other words, negativity doesn't last forever. How I can explain that to you philosophically, I'm going to have to think about it. But the short answer is, I don't know the long answer, so I'll give you the short answer. The short answer is that the Kabbalists and philosophers both insist that because unholiness is by definition untrue, in other words, it's not the true reality, so therefore it's not truly everlasting. But yes, it is true that within the unholiness, within negativity, is the more physical aspect of unholiness, which will end of the negativity, which will end after this experience ends. And then there's the more spiritual aspect of that trauma that will continue for a longer period of time. But ultimately, that negativity won't last forever. Because ultimately, negativity cannot last forever. That's the short answer. But that's a very good question. Okay, so the problem is like this. The problem is that it looks like, I think now I'm seeing the chart, I think that not everybody got my email, but the email was that unfortunately we started at 9 and we're finishing at 10 because unfortunately I have to take my daughter to a school event, social distancing, so don't worry about it. And she's gonna have her siddur party where they get their siddur because they learn to read. So that I'm gonna have to check out in about 7 or 8 minutes. And the challenge is that to introduce the next concept, you need more than 7 or 8 minutes, maybe 7 or 8 hours. So I'm just going to put it out there. It's the strangest medrash you probably ever heard. And the good news is that hopefully it's going to be so strange that you will come back next Sunday to figure out what on earth, or really what in heaven, this pun intended, what in heaven this medrash means. So this is like a cliffhanger. You ready? If you don't want the cliffhanger, if you don't want to come next week, I recommend you sign off now. But if you're willing to take the plunge and get the cliffhanger and then maybe not be able to sleep tonight to try to decipher what this medrash means, then you're invited to stay on for the cliffhanger. Okay, so what's the next issue we have to address? We discussed Wednesday, the first words, Yehi Me'orot, let there be luminaries. V'rki hashamayim in the skies, lehavdil, to separate between day and night. Okay, so what are the it's very interesting. If I ask you, what is the purpose of the luminaries? Me'orot. It's even called me'orot, which means luminaries. But the way the verse presents it, the illumination aspect of the luminaries, the fact that they produce light, is not the first thing it is mentioned. It's actually not even the first verse, it's the second verse. So what is the purpose of the luminaries? To distinguish between day and night. They will be for signs, for moadim, which can either mean times or festivals, for days and for years. In other words, in the first verse, we talk about the orbits of the sun and the moon and the stars, the luminaries, the orbit of the luminaries. What we're discussing is the passage of time. We're not discussing the light aspect, right? To differentiate between day and night, and moed, which could mean time periods or holidays, and days and year, and yamim, and days and years. So it's clear the first verse is talking about passage of time. The second verse says, and there'll be luminaries in the skies to give light to the earth. So it's just interesting, right? So when you talk about luminaries, what should we be thinking about? Light is the second verse. The first more important point of the luminaries is what we discussed earlier, the passage of time. So that's very interesting. And we can talk about, you know what, maybe we can skip the cliffhanger. Okay, let me give you one more insight. Okay, you know what? Let's talk about the signs. Let's leave the cliffhanger alone for a second. Vayu le'otot will be for signs. And for moadim, periods or holidays, and yamim v'shanim, and days and years. What does it mean it should be for signs? So we know that the Jewish calendar is a very, how do I say this nicely, without offending any of the Jewish history of any of the rabbis. Okay, nicely, I'll say it's a very complicated project. It's not very practical in the sense that in the Jewish calendar, the way it was in biblical times, there's no set calendar. If you want to create the new month, you have to go and you have to wait for people to see the new moon. And when they see the new moon, they can go to Jerusalem, go to the court and testify about it. And then the new moon, and then it could be declared the new month. The ramifications of this are immense. The ramifications are that you have no idea what the calendar is going to look like 1 month from now. Now go try to plan a Pesach retreat, a Passover retreat, 12 months from now, if you have no idea what that Passover will occur in, right? Because to establish Passover, which is the 15th day of the Hebrew month, you have to know the first day of the Hebrew month. But the first day of the Hebrew month cannot be established conclusively unless people cite the new month, the new moon, 2 weeks before the Passover. So it's not the most practical system. But Judaism is not necessarily just looking for practicality. If it would take the solar calendar, which is much simpler to use. The lunar calendar is not very good with practical, but it is very good to do what? To do what the verse says here, li'otot, for signs. Meaning to say, when we look at the universe, we're not just looking up, we look at the skies. We're not just looking up and saying, okay, we see the orbits, so we'll have a practical way of telling time, so we'll use the orbit of the planets to tell time. No, that's not what the verse says. The verse says, li'otot, a sign. What does a sign mean? A sign means the sign teaches you something that you can apply to your life. And that's why the sages teach that the Jewish people, Torah, it's actually the first mitzvah of the Torah is to establish a Jewish calendar. The first mitzvah given to the Jewish people in Egypt before any other mitzvah, the first mitzvah given to the collective Jewish people is to establish a calendar. So this must be important. What does it mean to establish a Jewish calendar? Is to tell time, not based on the sun, which is a little bit easier, but based on the moon. And what does that tell you? Because it's a sign, it's a lesson for us. What's the lesson for us? Why do we love the moon? Why did the Jewish people tell time? In the ancient world, in other words, in the Near East, we were unusual in the fact that we established our calendar based on the moon and not the sun. So what's the difference between the sun and the moon in its orbits? So the sun is basically consistent. Every day you look at the sun, you see the same thing. Of course, the degree where it is in the sky changes between summer and winter, but every day you see the sun, it looks the same. What happens with the moon? What's fascinating about the moon is every day it's different. Every time you go outside, the moon is different. Every night, the moon is different. It waxes and it wanes. And some people, some cultures love the sun because the sun represents strength, power, consistency, might. And people love those qualities. And those are wonderful qualities to have, especially if you want to build a mighty empire. But ultimately, in the long run, they're not the qualities that would allow survival. And I'll explain to you why. What is the moon? The moon is the idea of rebirth. So every month, the moon waxes and wanes. It's never the same. At the end of the month, it disappears for a night or two. You think it's never going to come back. And yet, what the moon does, miraculously, the moon is always going to reappear and recreate itself. In other words, in the language of science, you would see the moon has adaptability. And in general, species that can adapt are the species that survive. So the Jewish nation, how did we survive 3,000 years as a Jewish people in the face of tremendous persecution? If we were like the sun, meaning to say we have a sense of consistency and we have strength, that can be challenged, that can be attacked. And therefore all the empires who were like the sun disappear because they're challenged. The Jewish people's ability is that we're not as consistent, right? If we were consistent people, all the Jewish therapists would be out of business. Thank God they're not, because we keep them busy, because we're a complicated people. But what we do have is we have the capacity for rebirth. Just because yesterday there was no light in the sky, so it doesn't mean tonight I'm trapped into that model. We can continue to recreate ourselves. And that's a quality that the Jewish people at least the Jewish culture, in other words, Judaism, appreciates even more than consistency and strength, because you have to have adaptability, because there's change and the world will change and we will change. But what we have to understand is li'otot. That's the key word. The first thing we see about the sun is this, about the verse, is that the purpose of the luminaries is to teach us to take a sign, which means to teach us a lesson. What's the lesson? The lesson is be like the moon. Be like the moon means yesterday's reality doesn't define you today. And even if yesterday you were heading down, today you can recreate yourself. And if we take that lesson, then we can create holidays, et cetera, et cetera. All the holidays is really an extension of that idea, as we will discuss next week. I apologize, I didn't give you the cliffhanger, so you may not come back next Sunday. But if you do come back next Sunday, I'll say it then. So everybody, I apologize again for the time change, and I think that 1 or 2 people did not get my email. Unfortunately, I apologize. I wish you a wonderful week and a happy week. And like Seth said, the only way it's going to be a happy week is if you look at the moment and you don't connect to the physicality of the moment, because that is under the sun and that's fleeting and that's a curse. Every moment, you're eating breakfast, you're eating lunch, you're going on a walk, you're going to Todd's Point, whatever people do during Corona, whatever you do, seek the spirituality of that moment. Seek the transcendent energy in that moment. And if you do that, you'll be able to transcend the curse of Wednesday, and you'll be able to connect to Shabbos. You'll be able to connect to the energy of Shabbat. You'll be able to connect to the immortality that can be accessed through time, because time is the physical, but the physical could connect us to the spiritual if we use it correctly. So with that, I wish everybody a wonderful day and a wonderful week. If anybody wants to make a comment, I'm here for another 60 seconds or 120 seconds. Go ahead. Otherwise, have a wonderful day and a joyous day and a joyous week, because it's a big principle in Judaism is not to serve God, but to serve God with joy.
Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov, Jill. Thank you.
Rabbi?
Yes, doctor, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yesterday, my wallet was stolen right out of my car, and your talk is part of what's helping me to forget about it and move on.
Okay, so that's creating a spiritual experience from a negative experience. That's inspirational. I should learn from you a little bit more.
Well, thank you for your lecture. There's actual experience, and what you're teaching is helpful. Very helpful.
Thank you. Very, very much appreciated. Thank you for sharing.
Rabbi?
Yes.
In the next line, the Vav is put back into or.
Yes. Beautiful. I noticed it now today for the first time. The next verse, the Me'orot, the luminaries, which I began by saying that it's without a Vav, which means it's a curse. In the next verse, it says, let them be luminaries. And here it does have a Vav, which means it's not a curse. So what does this mean? I don't know. The Kli Yakar doesn't say it. But what Mark Rosenblatt is leading me to say, and because I guess I'm a nice guy, I'm going to say what Mark wanted to say. What Mark is saying is the whole purpose of this verse is telling you that if you take the message, if you take the message of the luminaries, then you could escape. And what yesterday was a curse, the physical experience was a curse, it no longer is a curse because you connected it to spirituality. And therefore, in the next verse, when it says luminaries, it has a vav because it's no longer a curse. Beautiful. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Everybody have a wonderful day, wonderful week.
Thank you so much.
And we will meet each other in good health, God willing.
God willing.
Thank you.
Yashikar, Rabbi.
Thank you.